Here we go.
Okay.
So we're December 7th, and this is Shari Ulrich, and I'm Denise Richard, and I'm interviewing you for the Bowen Cultural Master Plan. So nice to meet you, Shari.
Nice to meet you too.
And I would love to first ask you to take a moment and think about Bowen Island and you coming to Bowen Island, telling us a bit about that story, as well as you as an artist, as a performer, and a little bit of your journey here over the years that you've been here. So
that could take some time. I came here in 1993, just before my daughter's third birthday. Her dad and I moved here to raise her out of the city, and we realized that Bowen, after considering a lot of different areas, we simultaneously, when he was off playing and I was at home, and we simultaneously came up with the realization separately that Bowen was the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And we had looked here a couple of years before that when we were moving to a different place. And at that point, it just didn't feel quite right. But the second time, we knew that this is where we wanted to be. So we perceived it as being right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we lived in Tunstall Bay for a few years. And then I moved to above Artisan Square. And I think for probably the same reason a lot of people move here, it was I love being in nature. For me as a creative person, a lot of my creativity happens when I'm walking outside, a lot of my work on my songs. But I started to say I think a lot of people move here to have that access to something more rural, but not so far away from the city that they're cut off from the things that the city provides, which to me are friends and culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the ideal combination. Now I didn't have any anticipation of how long I would stay, or an intention of staying as long as possible. I just one foot in front of the other, and this is where I landed. And I have no intention of leaving ever.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is, I think it's more challenging for people who both work in Vancouver and they don't really get to be here enough to make it feel like it's worth the extra travel back and forth. But I think one of the reasons so many creative people live here is because they don't have to commute and they are able to be here, and it does fuel their creative lives and hearts and souls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer that nature plays a huge role in our sense of well-being,
Mm-hmm.
and in our creative lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I am still here.
Very nice. And can you tell me a bit about your work as an artist? Tell us a bit about. I mean, you don't have to go into the big story, but just an idea of how you came to be an artist and what it's like to be an artist on Bowen in particular. We're looking at Bowen culture. So
Yeah.
how has Bowen influenced you? Maybe you can look at that a little bit.
Well, Bowen has influenced me in terms of its access to nature. I mean, that's the biggest part. I would say, I think one of the reasons why I wasn't sure if I would be a totally relevant person to be interviewed is because so much of my creative life and my art takes place elsewhere.
Mm.
My creativity happens here.
That's the point.
But my expression goes elsewhere, except
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of times a year when I do a show on Bowen.
Right.
I am bringing other things to Bowen culturally by bringing my peers in to do concerts here, but in terms of my work, it pretty much all takes place elsewhere once it's created. I don't always write here. Sometimes I will specifically need to go somewhere else, because along with my creative life in my home is also my administrative life, which is so much more daunting and consuming than my creative life. It should be the other way around.
So that would be the organization that helps sustain your work.
Yeah, the business of being an independent musician / artist,
right.
Recording artist.
Right.
There's a huge amount of time and effort that goes into booking shows, advancing shows, promotion, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I need to remove myself. Well, and plus I like to putter around my house.
Why
I
not?
love home.
Why
I
not?
love house,
Yes.
and there's always, closets to clean out, and there's always that kind of stuff to do, which is always a little bit easier to me than writing. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's very easy for me to get distracted. So sometimes I will purposefully say, I'm going to this place just to write. That's all I'm going to do.
Right.
And force myself into a more productive state. But I have learned from the writing of my last album, which I had a month to do and I had to do at home, that I have no problem being creative at home when I know that there's a deadline and I have to do it. So my relationship culturally with Bowen has been somewhat distant in that I'm not always doing my work here and exhibiting my work here. I was involved in Nota Bene, the a cappella women's choir, for probably 10 years, maybe, before it disbanded, which I loved. It was a huge, nurturing part of my life. I was involved in the last cultural master plan.
Mm-hmm.
I have been involved, I chaired the committee for 3 years to try and get a performance space / community center built on the island. So my forays into improving the cultural life on Bowen, which is not necessarily so much, not just for the artists and performers, it's for the community,
Mm-hmm.
has been a frustrating exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's tremendous amount of passion and dedication and volunteer time put in by artists of every discipline to create avenues for work to be exhibited, whether it's theater or visual arts or music, and also to import those disciplines onto the island for the benefit of the community. And it does not quite translate into the support that's needed from council, whatever council that might be, or from whatever magical powers that there are to make those things happen, which is community based as well. And I attribute that to a lack of understanding or awareness on the part of all of us, really, of how important the arts is to us. It sounds like the arts is something over here, as something kind of it's a bit of a luxury or extraneous, or something that we don't necessarily need but maybe want. And I don't see it that way.
No.
I see it as, I don't even know how to put this into emphatic enough words, but I think we thrive on the arts every day of our lives, but we don't think of it that way. We think it's, oh, we're relaxing to watch TV, or we're going to put on some music while we cook dinner, or we're going to read the paper. I mean, anything that we consume in the course of a day, or so much that we consume, is related to the creative arts. Somebody created that work for us to consume, for it to come into our hearts and our lives. So we have lost that sort of link to connect with its role, an understanding of its role in our lives, and the importance of creating opportunities for us to access it in our daily lives, beyond the sort of things that I described, where we would go out to an art gallery to consume something, or we would go to hear a concert.
Well, you said something very important in the beginning, where you described how Bowen was where you create. And my thought on that was to ask you to describe what is that for you? Is that the living on Bowen gives you the time or space, or is the right venue for you to engage in your way of seeing and thinking or feeling your world around you? Or, because I think you're saying the same thing, that as an artist, what I see as important is that the artist engages somehow life and brings it to reality. In other words, takes some form of life, some aspect of life, and materializes into some form of expression.
Right.
So, given that you're a performance artist, your inspiration comes through your living on Bowen, your home. Is it the way that you describe the community that you live in?
I would say yes, that's true to some extent. I think my inspiration comes from everywhere, but the setting of being in a quiet place, being so, having nature right there outside my window is what allows for it to work itself into an expression.
Which is the most creative, right? There's nothing more creative than nature. I mean, it doesn't stop. It's continual. It's always talking a new story every day.
Miracle.
It's the miracle.
Every day.
Yes, exactly. So to live in a community that honors that very strongly, you'd have to if you want to live here by choice, but also in a community that has such a variety, actually a plethora, if you per capita, of artists or people who are actually engaged in appreciating and celebrating the arts as well as engaging the arts,
right,
is quite a special place, really. If we look at, comparatively speaking to other communities, I think that ours stands out a little bit. So when we're talking culture, my question to you would be, would you have thoughts on how you would describe Bowen culture? Does that come to you? Because you're describing something very special when you say you've been part of trying to bring the community into a more grounded perspective, or like community center kind of place that the arts can be more celebrated and engaged in more. Do you have any thoughts about what is the culture here that you see? I mean, is that something we can even put words to?
I don't. It's a challenge. I guess I don't see Bowen as a defined, finite place as having its own culture, because our culture is perhaps Canadian culture, or our culture might be from our heritage that we bring into it. But for the most part, artists are creating their work to be consumed outside of, on the other side of the ferry, some out there in the world. And sometimes, I mean, there is Toady, for instance, Theatre on the Isle used to have their performances here, and there are, I would imagine, some musicians that this is the main place that they play. But I think that's more rare than people who are creating their work here and exporting it elsewhere.
Okay.
But also celebrating it here. But I guess I've always struggled with, a concept that Bowen is its own finite culture somehow. It seems all homogenous to me, with the bigger world beyond the boat.
So the next thing I'd like to ask is, being a performer and being a musician, what would you say is one of the challenges that you face being a professional artist living on Bowen? What's the challenge that you face?
Getting home at night after a show.
Yeah. I would say that's probably a very practical.
Well, there are. Well, I had a relationship with someone for 20 years who we never lived together because he was a musician and needed to be in Vancouver. He wouldn't be able to get home at night if he just lived here. So that's a very significant choice that I made that this was important for me to be able to be here. Challenges. I don't really see any challenges to creating one's art here on Bowen.
Okay.
I think if anything, it's a particularly it's an easier place to do it because of all the things we've talked about as far as the inspiration all around us. But I would say that in terms of both local artists and performers having venues to exhibit their work that are um, feasible, not so labor intensive that it becomes too challenging. That is definitely a big factor to me, and that's been my frustration ever since I came here, and why I've invested as much volunteer time trying to make that happen as I have. And it's not, I think it gets, I probably already said this in another way, but I think it gets misunderstood as, oh, the artists want this for themselves. They want a place where they can put their work, or they want a place where they can put on concerts or a play. And I see it as having the potential it is being lost of what happens when a community comes together.
That's right.
To experience all those
there's
different
there's
forms
new
of art.
offshoots continually, especially since it would offer a way of viewing more, works in progress, for instance.
Yes.
Things that would impromptus, things that, if you had somewhere to work at, that it would culturally impact the community.
Yes, and I think the ripple effect, it's not something that you can put on a pie chart. That's
creativity, actually, in allowing the flow.
Yeah, and I think we have missed that connection that would allow the dedication and the will of everyone who would be required in order to make that happen.
Right.
It just has not been a priority, and I think there are some people in powerful positions, not just in terms of development and whatnot, who don't make that connection. And if they don't make that connection, it's a lot harder for it to happen. So it's been
given that you're artistically inclined, are there other types of artistic or cultural activities that you like to participate in on Bowen that you don't get a chance to do otherwise, because Bowen has that access to you?
Well, there's wonderful art classes. I have a little secret side of wanting to do visual art.
Very nice.
There are the Arts Council. It just plays such a huge role in our community. We're so lucky to have those dedicated people who continue to provide writing workshops and all manner of visual art disciplines, educationally and in exhibits as well. They're very proactive and very tenacious. Just keep
and
rolling.
Creative, absolutely creative in the fundraising and the.
Yeah, the events that I've attended at the gallery that are, the openings and the auctions and things like that. That there's just nothing quite like it on the island when people gather for those purposes, and the connections that everybody makes, and the friendships, and that complex web of humans that come together around those sorts of things. And that's just a little drop in the bucket of what could happen if there was an arts/community center based facility on the island. And I say that again, not just because, that would be a much easier place to put on a show. I say that because I play in all these community centers around, across Canada. And every time I play one, all the people who are involved in bringing the arts to their community gather together in their volunteer effort to make this show happen. And then all the community comes, and that sense, I keep using the word community because it's a very tangible sense when people come together. Beautiful. In that effort. And I experience it over and over again.
So here's my next question then, because what you just described is something very special. You have an experience of the community here on Bowen and the need for anchoring that in a certain way that you've put effort into. But you also have an experience of looking at how the culture extends itself outside of here in terms of your work and the different communities and the way the communities come together. So you're touching something very, very special when you're describing that. Would you be able to then speak a little bit about what it's like to have and to be a professional artist outside of Bowen? And more, you're a Canadian artist, and you've been able to touch the whole of Canada pretty much, it sounds like, and feel that community. Can you talk a bit about that and your experience of that?
Oh, well, it's the greatest thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I've never ever lost my sense of gratitude that this is what I get to do in my life. It goes so much deeper than just playing some songs in a room with an audience. It's I mean, in the type of work that I do, where I'm singing about people's lives, and we all share so much in common, and the gratification of that, feeling the effect of that, and the gratitude that comes from the audience, and this full circle that happens. Yeah, the exchange is so powerful and life affirming and gives me hope in humans, and it's a very profound experience that I get to have every night that I'm performing.
So you're talking about a service, really. You're actually expressing a certain level of service that we do.
Yes, I feel like, I think often people misinterpret what might be behind why someone performs. Like even my own family thinks it's, oh, I like attention. And I see it as, I do see it as an act of service, and I see it as that it's not about me at all.
It's about giving.
And it's about the music. In my case, it's about the music. It's about that art form. It's about it. And so when I'm performing it, what my internal voice is not, look at me, aren't I great? It's about, listen to that. Isn't that amazing what music can do? How it can make you feel that way? Because I'm a consumer of it just like everybody else. And I'm experiencing it while I'm creating it, and reveling in how beautiful it can be and how amazing it is that somehow magically my hands can do that. I don't know how they do that. It's just all a big miracle, and so we're all, everybody in the room is experiencing that together.
So you're talking about consciousness in a certain way. I mean, creativity, the way you've just described it, is a much bigger package. When it starts hitting a bigger field of audience, you're opening up your consciousness in your heart and sharing that and watching how it's ripple effect and creates a certain package. In the end, it's like a sharing of culture.
Yeah.
That you've actually generated here from a seed, right? And that I think is pretty special, that you're anchored here and that you're extending that throughout Canada.
It's amazing.
It is. Sounds like
and I get to make a living at it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad for you.
Incredible.
That's the beauty of it.
That is the beauty of it, and it's
So, would you, given that you know a little bit more about Canada culturally than other artists would know, I mean, that's part of your work. Would you like to then think about the distinction of Bowen Island to, let's say, Vancouver, artistically? Like, how would you see the difference?
Well, again, that kind of goes back to what I said before. I don't know that I see that there's some sort of artistic bubble around us and that we're really different than what goes on elsewhere. It's all about the humans who are creating the art, and they're all different.
Very different.
And some of them live here, and some of them live other places.
And depending on their culture, their ethnicity, and so on.
And their life experience. I just don't necessarily see us as having a defined proprietary culture.
Yeah.
I think it's morphs all across.
I think that the question of culture here is that somehow we're trying to define the impact of how we perceive reality and how we express that artistically and the uniqueness of it on Bowen. Is there a uniqueness? Or maybe there isn't. Maybe you're saying it's just the combination of the people that are here at this moment that defines it. Maybe it's not something we can package or actually see trends in, but maybe there is. And if there's anything you can add to that.
I think it would just be that we all have this common experience of our love of this island, and that we are all triggered by driving around the corner and there's those amazing mountains, or there's the water, or there's that particular angle that we see when we come into the cove, and there's
That's
the
so
ferry,
beautiful.
and yeah, those common visual triggers and our sense of home that's connected with that.
Right.
The one thing I do feel strongly about Vancouver that makes us, well, this is specific to music, but that makes us in a really ideal position is that we are so close to Vancouver, but because of the moat, the artists who come through Vancouver can perform on Bowen the night before or the night after they play Vancouver, which is for our proximity. It can't happen in other areas of North America. It's because of the ferry that allows this to be a very separate market, and consequently we're in a position to have world-class artists come into our living room of Bowen Island to do concerts, which is rare unless you live in the city. And if you live elsewhere, you have to travel a long way in order to avail yourselves of that particular work. But and that's the thing that I have always wanted to be able to build on, and what I'm starting to build on by bringing concerts to the island, because it's so unique.
That's great.
And
That's
every
great.
artist wants to be able to perform as many shows as they can when
That's
they're
right.
out on tour, and we've adapted to be able to be a show on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or whatever day, and people will come. So that, to me, that's really exciting.
That's very exciting that you actually have the reach to be able to do that too. That's one of the things that's unique about your service here to Bowen too.
Yeah,
that
probably.
You bring people in.
Yeah.
That we wouldn't normally
get to see. Because I know them,
see.
and it's easy for me to lure them here.
Lure them. Little, come on. So, you've been here for 22 years. Can you speak a little bit about what do you see has changed the most since you've arrived, or can you speak to the changes that you know?
Well, I think we've become a bit more gentrified, as everything has in Vancouver as well.
What do you mean by gentrified?
We have Artisan Square. We have the gallery. We have more little places to eat and little places to buy clothes, and
so it's become a little community of it's like more serviceable.
Yeah, and certainly, becoming a municipality and taking on our own governance was a big leap. So I've seen that transition, which I think has had its good points and its not so good points. I'm just talking to a friend who lives on Salt Spring, I guess they regularly consider it as well, just like we did, and was asking for pros and cons from my opinion and experience. So yeah, I think that sense of sort of, it's our friends and neighbors who are in a position of governance, and we are having to be grown-ups about how our stewardship of the island and of the land and how we do things has made it very different to live here.
Well, it creates consciousness of your environment,
Yes,
much more so than if you're in a city, because
absolutely.
everything is kind of owned in the city, where you're not governing, you don't have the responsibility in the same way as if if you're going to walk down Hastings Street, you're not going to start picking up garbage necessarily. But if you're
Right.
here and you're walking down the street or you're walking on a trail, you'll pick up a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
There's a sense of responsibility to maintaining the cleanliness that nature
Yeah.
provides.
That's right.
So, can you speak a little bit then about the sense that you spoke of initially of nature and the impact of nature on the creative flow here? Like, do you see it as having that much more of an impact than if you were in the city?
I definitely see it as having a big impact, and I think for me it's more about my creative process, which involves a lot of walking while
Okay.
I mull lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's sort of like the difference between canvases that are already half filled because there's so much noise and activity going on, or a blank canvas that allows your mind to go on a journey
Mm-hmm.
with it.
Mm-hmm.
I have always lived places where I liked what I saw out the window and
Mm-hmm.
felt there was something kind of meditative about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always because it was nature.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. So for our last question, I'd like to ask you whether or not you have any thoughts about what what Bowen would need artistically or creatively. Do you see anything that you'd say, artistically or creatively? Is there a thought about what would you add to the mix, just for the pleasure of it, just for the thought of it?
I keep just getting into this rut of a place, that we need a place where we can gather.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard for me to think of it in terms of, oh, is there we should be having ceramic arts be more accessible, or,
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of it in those terms. I
Just a
just
gathering,
keep
a place of
going back
meeting,
to that place.
or somehow a place where the arts particularly get supported, and there's a crossroad for the arts.
Well, and I think even that phrase, arts get supported, it's the arts don't need support, they just need access to
Okay. Thank you.
the people,
Access.
the humans who are hungry for it.
Yeah.
and they don't even realize that they're hungry for it until they get it.
Yeah.
It's similar to how I when I lived on Salt Spring, I felt this way too, that when I would be in the city for a long time and I think, oh well, I guess I should go home, and when I'd go home, and it happens to me on Bowen, I don't realize until I get on that ferry or I walk in my house how much I need to be here.
Right.
And I don't think we know until we go to that play, or we go to that concert, or we go to the opening of a new artist that we haven't experienced before, and we are moved in a way that nothing else moves
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a tangible thing where we can...
Or we can't expect it either. You don't know.
No,
You
you
don't
don't
know.
know.
And only.
But there's something that happens, that when a community is experiencing something like that together, there is something where the community is affected as a whole. It has a ripple effect. The Good Lovelies concert that we had the other night, I didn't know what to expect. None of us really knew what to expect. And we came out of there with this shared experience of, when we'd see somebody on the street in the next few days who had been there, it was like, oh, wasn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
There's just...
So a shared time together.
Yeah.
And of heart, a real beauty.
It's a very powerful thing, and it's a very healthy thing for our community. And I think we need more health here.
Thank you. That sounds lovely. Sounds like a good way to end here today. And I want to say thank you.
Oh, you're very
Thank you for your
welcome.
time.
Thanks
It's
for
been
your
a pleasure.
questions.
Yes.